I do agree that oftentimes diverse attorneys, regardless of in-house, in a law firm, any place, don't get as many opportunities to fail as some of their peers may. So I've seen that throughout my career.
That was Karen Ann Lloyd, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Community Health Network, talking about how she has navigated an amazing legacy-building legal career in healthcare. And this is the 5th anniversary episode of IBJ's Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Good afternoon, Karen Ann, and thank you so much for joining us on this 5th anniversary episode, our 60th episode of the Freedom Forum. Welcome. Throughout my time hosting the podcast, I've had the pleasure of speaking with many professionals and executives, but just a few of them were nearing the end of their esteemed career, namely some of my mentors and great professionals that you'll know personally: Alan Mills, Sharon Barner, Rod Cotton, Bill Heath, and Tony Prather most recently. And I know you know many of those folks, but you're yet another trailblazer, a legacy builder in the Indianapolis business community that I'm super thrilled to speak with and have on the show, particularly for this milestone episode. However, before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Community Health Network for the last 20 plus years?
Sure. Thank you again so much for having me on, Angela. It's a privilege and an honor. I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm actually living now in the home that I grew up as a child, raising my kids in the Butler-Tarkington area. Went to Catholic schools, St. Thomas, Ladywood St. Agnes, and then had a journey in my life as far as colleges. So in 4 years, I've gotten credit from 4 different universities.
Wow.
I started my career at the IU Heron School of Art, realized that was not a talent, then went to DePaul and Greencastle, Indiana, saw the Klan walked and said it's time for me to move on, went to South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, and then for personal reasons came back to Indianapolis and got my degree from IU Bloomington, major political science and surprisingly old English literature. Then went to start, SPIA was just coming up, and so started a master's in public health and chose in the middle of that master's to go into law and went to law school in Bloomington and completed my law degree there.
So that explained the going away and coming back to Indiana, but you're an Indiana native at the end of the day and an Indianapolis native. And ultimately, you went a very traditional path for many Hoosiers, which is to go to IU Bloomington ultimately, and then go to IU Maurer Law School. Interestingly, I thought it was interesting, after you finished law school, you went to D.C. and started a full-time position for 3 years at the U.S. House Committee Ways and Means Health Subcommittee. Now, I got to tell you, I've heard about this on CNN, but I've never met anybody who actually did a role like that. So I want to know, with your political science undergrad and this role coming straight out of law school, did you have political aspirations? Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer? What did you anticipate when you went to undergrad and then went to law school that your career would be as compared to what it's turned out to be?
I didn't really lay out a plan for my career. I took opportunities and guidance as they came up. So in SPIA, I actually wanted to get into public health, realized regressions and all those statistical analysis things were not my strength, and then went into law. In law school, I really wanted to focus on justice for certain underrepresented individuals, spent time doing work in the federal prisons with some deaf cases with Professor Shornhurst, and then realized that too was not a strength. And I was terrified sometimes going into some of those environments, not for my clients, but because of those who are walking me through the space. And so when I graduated law school, I was not really knowing what I was going to do. A friend of my mother said, hey, if you want to work as an unpaid intern at the Health Subcommittee with Ways and Means, I'll let you work there for 3 months. And if you can prove yourself, they hire you, great. If not, I've given you 3 months to find a career path.
Right.
Andy Jacobs was a good friend of my mom's at the time. And so I went ahead and took that position. And lo and behold, they hired me onto the professional staff. and I worked healthcare policy for the next 3.5 years.
That's awesome. I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there. You took an unpaid internship. That's daggone near unheard of these days. These kids don't know anything about doing some work that's unpaid. That's a whole different thing. But also that you didn't necessarily know what you wanted to do. I appreciate that because that's where I was. I had no idea what schooling would open career paths. I didn't know what career paths out there. And like you, just took opportunities as they presented themselves. That is what got me to law school. And I say that because I think we put so much pressure on kids now to know from elementary and middle school and certainly by high school what they want their career paths to look like. And the reality is you don't know, quite frankly, until you get into the job market, all the different opportunities that are available to actually pursue a career.
And I'd be remiss and I say I was fortunate growing up. My parents were professionals. My dad was a physician. He was president Methodist. He led research, but he also did a lot of stuff in the community and giving back in the community. My mom was the first Black female representative in the state legislature here in the state. So again, I had the ability to see that. Our community was full of lawyers, doctors, ministers, educators. Every job that we saw growing up was a professional job. You could be working for the Postal Service. So we were around that kind of community. And so there were so many different avenues that everybody kind of supported you. You'll find yourself in time and gave us the grace to kind of find ourselves in the right time.
So Karen, I want to know, because I grew up with nothing like that. And I truly believe that kind of exposure in and of itself changes the trajectory of people's lives because just seeing Black professionals, number one, just knowing that as a baseline that you can be, that in and of itself tells a child you can be a doctor, a lawyer, a post office worker, a whatever it wanted to be, wherein so many other of us don't see that, so have no idea that some of those career opportunities are available or that they are available to you, right? Like for me, obviously, I saw doctors and nurses when I was growing up, but never saw anyone that looked like me in those positions. And so I didn't have that underlying, just understanding, fundamental understanding that I could be those things. And even more so have the supporting community around me that encouraged me and was confident that I would end up being one of those things, whatever I chose to do. How does that foundation change the outlook, ambition, trajectory of a diverse child as compared to one that does not just inherently see those opportunities?
I think it obviously lets you know it's available, that people have done it. But when you're in that community, we also knew what the hardships were in accomplishing that. And you had a safe space to come back to say, okay, I've got these opportunities. I am the only person of color at the table. Help me navigate that. And you had people who would navigate that space who could give you counsel and advice and cautionary tales as to how to balance it as you were moving through those things. So I think seeing it, and then we also grew up respecting every career. And so I think a lot of times people will look down on certain careers. We respected everyone. So from the educator to the postal worker to the garbage collector, they were all part of our community. They were working, giving back. But the main thing was you saw it, you got exposed to it, and you had the safe space to help navigate it because they had gone through a lot more challenges than I did, even though I went through my fair share.
I think that's so important because you have to remember and put things in context. This is well before social media. This is maybe even before the internet, I expect. So there's not this remote community out there that's cheering you on and following and liking and saying good job. Your community was your physical community, the people who are around you, and certainly as people of color in professional roles in that time, there were unquestionably hardships and barriers and obstacles that each one of them, I'm sure in their own individual way, were overcoming. And you needed that safe space in a very real way, right? Not just emotionally safe, but physically safe.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
in a very real way to discuss and strategize about how you're going to overcome these challenges, particularly when you are, like so many of us still are to this day, the first in your community, the first in that workspace to be of color or of a particular gender, and you realize in the moment you're breaking barriers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So while in DC, you went on from your healthcare commission role to GC of sound like a nonprofit organization. So tell me about that. And then how did that lead from you going from kind of this legislative work to going into private practice?
I'm blessed to have had not only mentors, but sponsors. And most of them were women, not of color, but of women. And honestly, I listened to people who I trusted. So when I was with the Ways and Means Committee, the director of that committee at the time said, "Hey, there's an opening at this healthcare commission. It's a governmental healthcare commission. They're looking for their first GC and they want someone who does regulation. I think it'll be a great opportunity for you. So I'm going to call over there and basically negotiate your contract. Once I've done that, I will have them offer you the job." And I trusted her and I listened to her and then went to the commission, which is now PROPAC, I think, and it does healthcare legislative things for Medicare, Medicaid. Was there for several years. And the lawyer from a law firm reached out to say, "Hey, we're looking for someone to fill a kind of a regulatory role within our firm." And I gave them a number of names of people I thought would be appropriate. And after talking with them, back and forth, she goes, "Those are great names, but you should come. And if you don't leave government, put the fear of God in me, you'll forever be, tarnished and you'll never get into private practice." May not be true, but she made it seem as though it was. And so then I went to a law firm, Epstein, Becker and Green, and had a really great mentor there. Lynn Shapiro-Snyder was a great mentor. She was the first female partner at the law firm. And so she made sure I had the opportunities to see what pitches looked like. She made sure we published to the extent that she would write an article every month or every other month, put my name on it. I'd write on the off month and we would co-author it. So she made sure I understood what that was, what that looked like, and was very transparent about her struggles about being the first one at the table. So much so, though, there was one occasion where the men were continuing their conversation, walked into the bathroom. She walked into the bathroom with them and said, "Either we're going to have the conversation together or I'll turn my back so I can be part of this conversation while you are all using your various urinals or whatnot." So
we hear so much about pulling up a chair if there's not a chair. I haven't heard the analogy of walking into the bathroom, but sometimes it takes that, right?
Right. But she said she was going to make sure it was a point that you're not going to exclude me.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, I appreciate even that story because so many times just asking about the situations that you as a diverse person, whether you're a woman or a person of color or whatever the diverse trait is, some of the barriers you've experienced, some of the challenges, some of the obstacles, and certainly nobody considers that the conversation leaves the boardroom table and goes into the bathroom, but that's a real thing that no one would even consider or, quite frankly, even in this day and age, even imagine would actually occur. But these are so many stories that so many professionals that I speak with that are on the podcast or just know that have happened over the course of time that people in this day and age hardly even believe are real things.
I would say for me, and I can jump through them, but I'll start with where I am today. So I was the maybe second general counsel at Community. When I joined, my predecessor had been gone for over a year. There was someone who was serving as interim. And while I didn't necessarily change titles while I was at Community, I had to give the table quite a bit because they didn't use lawyers. My predecessor worked on maybe one area of law. I didn't know who the client was. And so it took a lot of navigating to say, let's be at the table. We can add value. We're not just here for HR complaints, which is kind of, or commitment hearings, which is kind of what they looked at legal for. There's a broader role that we can play.
Right.
Almost so that there was a couple of occasions where my wall was next to the CEO at the time, Bill Corley and others, and I would hear conversations through the wall, and I'd go knock on the door saying, "Hey, I'm hearing this. Let me put myself in the conversation to kind of give some guidance and whatnot." So that's kind of been a need all along. So while I didn't go up the ladder, so to speak, it's, the past several years, it's finally my CEOs are saying, we really now want you at the C-suite table with the executives. And so it's, from being in a room of 20, now it's in a room of 6. And then one of my previous bosses said, and don't wait for what you want to say to be said. If it crosses your mind, you're waiting too long for someone else to say it. They encourage me, say it when it crosses your mind. So that it becomes, we hear your voice a little bit more clearer. So
yeah,
that kind of support as well.
Yeah. And how has that been? Because what I hear you saying is over the course of the time that you've been at Community, you've had to change the culture to allow the business to appreciate what legal can bring to the table. And I hear this over and over again that, oh my goodness, the lawyers don't do anything but tell us no. They don't do anything but tell us why we can't do what we want to do as fast as we want to do it. And I've heard from multiple attorneys, in-house positions, who said, I've had to educate and navigate the internal business culture to appreciate what legal can bring to the table to not just mitigate or manage risk, but also to help the business do what they want to do and get where they want to go, but just do so in a legally compliant way. There are risks that I, as a legal person, can bring to the table or define or analyze that can so often proactively prevent a company from getting into trouble, that if you don't have that analysis or don't have that voice at the table, you miss. And then particularly in such a highly regulated field as yours.
And we know what ours has landed in. So
yeah, it can be real risk. So how has it, these are the things that when you go in-house, they don't necessarily tell you. You think, especially as a private practice person, you think you're going in to do the legal work, but in fact, you're educating the business. You're helping navigate the business clients, appreciating and informing them on how legal can continue to support in ways they know and can begin to support in ways they may be unaware.
For me, again, I was the first one. I was a department of 1, and it took me several years to become a department of 5 or 6. So we are still very lean, and half my department is less than 5 years old. I think what it took for us is to to kind of force ourselves to be at the business conversations.
Yeah.
And it's changing how you communicate with the internal business clients. You're not coming to say this legally. You're understanding the operations and you're helping to direct that strategic conversation, giving guardrails.
Right.
And every guardrail is what shade of gray do you want to be in today?
That's right.
And we want to stay in the lighter shade of gray for obvious reasons. But I think a main part of it was for us to approach the business partners valuing their knowledge, leaning on them for their expertise, because we're not operators and that's not what we want to pick up. And when they appreciate that we're valuing what they're bringing to the table and working alongside of them, the good and the bad is now they come to us for everything.
Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. But I think even in the C-suite, when we go and have our executive committee meetings, they really are insisting that you're not wearing your department's hat per se, but you're there representing the company. And so you're not just coming to talk about legally what you can and can't do.
Right.
You're actually contributing strategically, where do we need to be and how do we get there in the next 1, 3, or 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense, which is why being in that C-suite is so important, because you're seeing not just your departmental view, but the larger, broader strategic view for the company and for the future, right? That's often what you're talking about is future, what's happening in the future. So I really appreciate that. So given that you've identified that you started as a department of 1, you've now grown, you're still very lean, but you have really seemingly built the legal function and capability that currently exists to support such a healthcare giant. I want to know, what are some of the things that you learned in your time at private practice beyond the BD? Because you talked about, just being a thought leader and making sure that you elevate yourself and give yourself visibility in that way. I particularly appreciate that given my current role, because I'm getting a lot of mentorship right now to do that same thing in order to elevate your visibility as a subject matter expert. But also, what did you find were strengths or weaknesses that transition from being in private practice to really allowing you to be a thought leader and a business leader once you went in-house?
Well, I'll go back. So when I left government and policy, I went into private practice. I had to learn not to look at my clients' issues from a policy perspective because I was drafting the laws and knew what we were intending. I had to try to learn, as Lynn said, Karen, that's a really great governmental argument. Now you're putting on the client's hat. Let's look at what the words on that page say relative to the client needs to happen. So that was a major mind shift for me in addressing client concerns. And then understanding what the client needs and how to clearly provide advice, realizing that you have no say in the decisions they make. And so that was a little difficult in private practice. And I'm giving you advice, and I have no idea what you've done with it, how you operationalized it, or if you just put it into the trash can and covered it up. Going from private practice to in-house, I've learned that my internal clients don't always know the questions they should be asking, or they're not asking me the right question. And so what I've had to spend more time on, and I learned a little bit of this in my private practice going in, is you can ask me a question, what color is the sky today? I need to understand the context of the question, because I could say blue and the context could be completely different, and it's really not the color of the sky you want to know. You really want to know, are we facing a thunderstorm upcoming?
Right.
But the way they've asked the question, I can answer it. And so what I've had to learn in the transition is to really be more thoughtful about understanding the question, understanding the context of the question. And many times when you have those conversations, the business owner realizes they weren't even asking the right question. And so I've had to be a little bit more thoughtful about that.
I'm just appreciating in this conversation and even in preparing for this conversation that you are one of the few lawyers I know outside of Sharon Barner probably who's had this triple exposure from a legal perspective, the governmental, the private practice, and significant in-house experience. And you just talked about kind of how your mind had to shift, how your approach to legal work had to shift based on those three contexts, being in the governmental role, being in the private practice role where you're serving client needs, and then being in the in-house world where you're still serving client needs. Those clients are just internal to your business. I think that is a very narrow percentage of people that get to see the legal landscape over the course of a career. And I appreciate that because it takes over the course of a full career to be able to get that kind of exposure. I just want to ask a silly question at this point. What did you enjoy most? I mean, looking back retrospectively, what has been the most enjoyable, or maybe there were aspects of each that you found the most enjoyable, but as you beginning, or maybe I'm rushing you to this, but as you're beginning to look back, I mean, over the course of your career, and if you haven't done that, I want to encourage you to, because you and the Sharons and we have some real gems in this community that's why I do this podcast, to highlight so many of the people who have such extensive knowledge and skill and breadth and depth that we don't always celebrate. And a lot of the times, particularly when they're in-house, people don't necessarily know you're there. People don't necessarily know all the things that you've really contributed to the broader legal landscape, and particularly in this community. Now it's time for a break.
Thanks for listening to this IBJ Media podcast. You're probably going to remember this ad. Do you know why? Podcast advertising works. 85% of listeners recalled hearing an ad during a podcast, and 70% of podcast listeners have acted after hearing an ad. So whether you're looking to be heard across the entire IBJ Media podcast network, sponsor one of our shows, or just start with a 30-second ad, IBJ Media can help. Contact advertise@ibj.com to learn more.
We're back with Karen Ann Lloyd, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Community Health Network, on this 5th anniversary episode of the Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. As you think about your career, what did you really enjoy? What have you really enjoyed being a lawyer in those different settings? And what will you take with you as you begin to ramp down over, the next course of the next 6 to 8 months or so?
Great question. I'll have to reflect on that in the next few months as I'm ramping down. I'm one who likes lateral learning. And I would just, I'm probably master of nothing, but I love lateral learning. And I love surrounding myself with subject matter experts. So one of the things I would say in-house I have enjoyed is having a team that's knowledgeable and having my bosses in the past saying, Karen, I'm going to give you kudos, not for what you do, but for you understanding your limitations, your weaknesses, and bringing in talent to support them and letting that talent shine.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed that. Sometimes I still take call. So we are on call 24/7 for the health system. I enjoy being able to pick up the phone, address a nursing concern at 2 a.m. And so I enjoy that kind of giving back. And then more broadly, I enjoy when I was in the Ways and Means Committee, helping address constituent concerns and trying to develop policies that were going to provide better services to Medicare patients. That was my committee was Medicare. So I've enjoyed those kinds of things.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, that sounds like it gets back to the fundamental interest of many lawyers, although people wouldn't necessarily believe that, which is to help, right? To help people to make our lives, our communities, our nation better. And so I appreciate that you had really seemingly amazing experiences where you've gotten exposed to a lot, gotten to learn a lot from many talented, knowledgeable people. But I don't want to allow you to leave without also sharing with us some of the real challenges that you've experienced. Because as I talk to the Alan Mills and the Tony Prathers, and I mean, they had some really interesting and almost amazing stories at this stage of the game, just because I think we so often forget that so many of the inequities, the blatant inequities that occurred not just in our country, but in our workforces are within a career, within a generation, that the people that experience so many inequities are still in the workforce. They haven't necessarily gone away. And Alan and Tony told us some really crazy stories about some of the things that they experience being young lawyers or earlier in their career. So I want to know if there's anything that you're willing to share that, just puts a face, puts an example, because I think so many of our listeners who don't walk in our shoes, who don't experience what we experience day to day, don't really understand, out of some of the blatant craziness that we see on the news every day, what inequities or what we often coin as microaggressions look like in the workforce when they're not so explicit or so obvious or so blatant. Those are the easy ones. It's when, someone just kind of slights you or offends you, but it's not in an overt way that you struggle with. So what have been some experiences that you recall that you had to overcome, throughout the course of your career?
Well, Lacey Johnson was one of my mentors because I was at Ice Miller for so long.
Sure.
And so he was always kind of willing to say and be transparent about certain things. I mean, certainly we've all had clients when I was in private practice that walk into a room, and if there's anyone not looking like me at the table, they're going to assume that that's the person that's leading the meeting. And on many occasions, they were going to my secretary to say, now, and she'd say, nope, this is who you need to be talking to. So that would happen without routinely. Or I would go to a client meeting in some of our rural areas. We represent some of the county hospitals. And I appreciate the fact that the CEO would say, oh, we're going to have lunch in my office today, because they knew they could not take me to even the cafeteria in their building because of, what can happen. So I've experienced those kinds of things. I think the ones that happen that I've learned how to be more forceful with is we'll make a comment, we'll make a suggestion, and it'll go as though you're invisible or not heard until that same comment is repeated by someone who doesn't look like us. And then all of a sudden it's a great idea. And what I've had to learn to do is I'll let it go. If I hear it, though, I will immediately say, thank you so much, John, Tom, or whomever, reiterating what I was saying before. I like the way you worded it to kind of bring it back to where the comment came from initially. I've had to navigate how you express yourself because I've had to stand up for some of my sister friends when I'll go into a meeting. Well, no, she was really so aggressive. I'm thinking, well, this person we called passionate and you're calling her aggressive. I think this person was more aggressive because of the language they used versus someone showing their passion. So I had to remind them when you use that language, look at who you're using it towards. I've had one circumstance where we were going through a heated conversation and someone who doesn't look like me got up flustered in tears. Everyone kind of raced to them, and I had to remind them, and I did in a private meeting. I did not do it in public, saying, "Let me let you know what you did, how that can be perceived. It may not have been your intent, but it can be perceived as a certain kind of privilege that were I to do that would be looked at differently." And so, I mean, I'm assuming we've had similar kinds of things.
Sure. So thank you for sharing that because I know, that's not easy. It's not easy to, those are the things you kind of want to put in the past and leave in the past. But I also appreciate that I think it's important for people to know that often, no matter how high in the food chain you get, there are going to be some folks, no matter your title or your education or your degrees, that only see one thing.
What I meant to say is that sometimes, though, I think people forget who you are.
Yeah.
An example would be I presented at a retreat, and one of the comments that came back from really senior people was, we need to diversify who's presenting. And I'm saying, guys, look at me. Do you not see a Black woman? And I think for them to have accepted me in my role, I became colorless. And they were almost looking a little bit shocked that they said we didn't have anybody diverse on the panel. And so I think that happens a lot. Even with clients, sometimes they will need not to see you as you are in order to accept the position that you hold.
That's actually very powerful because so many of us in high level, high visible roles who are diverse and who seem to get the buy-in from your constituents believe we finally broken the barrier. And what you're asserting is they kind of separate the two, that you are this person in this role, which is kind of separate and different from the Black woman who you actually are. And certainly we know, being the people in those that live that life, there is no separation, certainly not for us, right? Which is why we have these conversations, which is why this podcast exists, to highlight and give light to some of the conversations that we often have in private because we know there's no laying it down. There's no getting rid of it. And so I appreciate that because I've never heard anyone say that. And maybe that's their way to cope or deal or accept that these two roles and people exist within the same body in a way that maybe in their mind or their own bias, that could never happen or would not typically happen. I think that's very interesting. Thank you for that. So one of the things, so we talk about diversity and we've been talking about it from the vantage point of gender and ethnicity. But I want to talk about something that often doesn't get talked about, and particularly with you because you exemplify this in such a way that I do not. We talk about introverts versus extroverts. We talk about quiet confidence. You are probably one of the most senior leaders that I have the ability and the privilege to work with who truly exudes the quiet confidence. You are, even on here, you're soft-spoken. That's how you move. Like, I've known you many years at this point, and that's who you are. And I want to address that and talk about that because particularly in the legal field, it's always assumed that the loudest person in the room, the most passionate or aggressive is the leader, right? And you really exude and exemplify that you don't have to be loud and you don't have to be the highest volume or even the most educated or the most senior to be the leader. I was just telling some of my colleagues, I was in the Stanley K. Lacey Executive Leadership Forum, and our moderator, who you will appreciate, is Dr. John Lechleiter, who was the CEO of Lilly. And he always taught us, and we just had a reunion, he reiterated it, lead from the seat you sit in. And the point of that was you don't necessarily have to have a particular title to lead. You lead from the seat you sit. And so I want to talk about, your quiet confidence. I want to know, at what age or stage or level in your career did you find the confidence? And when did you feel strong enough or confident enough to vocalize it in the way that in some of the ways you just mentioned, particularly in a corporate business environment where it often does promote the more outgoing, the more, we used to call them gunners in law school, the people who just go for it. They're going to go, they're going to make it clear what they're trying to do, whether it happens or not, they're going to push. And I want to know about your quiet confidence, how you found it to be, and you keep making this face when I say that. So I want to know what your thoughts are here. Do you think you have a quiet confidence, or is that just my perception because I'm so different from you? Let's start there.
So I think there's a misperception sometimes about introverts.
Yeah.
It's kind of where you gain energy. So being an introvert, which all of my tests would say I am.
Okay. So I didn't make that part up. Okay.
But it doesn't mean that I don't like to engage.
Sure.
It just means where I like to get my energy from and how I need to kind of recharge myself. Part of, I think, my way of being is how I was raised and what I saw growing up. And my dad was a major leader in this community, Black doctor, started a bank, started WTLC, president Methodist. And it was more powerful on occasion in the quietness of not feeling like you had to be the one saying it's my idea, it's my idea, it's my idea. But how do you quietly develop that group consensus so we can all move down the same path together? So I think part of it just likely is from how I was raised and what I saw growing up in large part. I'm just by nature quiet, and even my leaders have told me, you got to speak up. You got to not wait for something to be said. You need to say it. And so I've had to do that a little bit more. But then also within community, we believe in servant leadership. That's our leadership model that we adopted over a decade ago. And that really is, how do I support the team above me to do what they need to do? And if I do that loudly, then I'm covering them up.
Right.
And that's not my intent.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And I thank you for speaking to that, because you are again one of the first people that I truly have seen as an introvert really lead in a powerful and long standing way. And I know plenty of people again who kind of sit on the side where we're outgoing and we can be extroverted, but we need that internal me time to kind of recharge. But that's different than someone like yourself who does just genuinely more quiet. But to your point, very much likes to engage. I've gotten to know you very well. I know what you like. I know what you don't. And you're a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun together. So I appreciate you just kind of speaking to that, because there always seems to be this kind of a pull between extroverts and introverts, and can introverts truly be leaders, and can you be a quiet leader and still lead, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for speaking to that. I want to turn a bit now to your actual role as GC, because again, I've spoken to many lawyers. I don't think people really appreciate what lawyers do. I think they think we dress up and act like, we're important and make a lot of money, but nobody ever knows what we actually do. And the truth of the matter is, if a lawyer's doing a good job, they are preventing bad things from happening, right? I mean, if we have the opportunity to get involved early, get in front of our clients, we can mitigate risk and mitigate negative outcomes. But on a general level, particularly at a institution, a huge healthcare institution like Community, what does your day-to-day job look like? What do you do? And I know that's not the same every day. But even more, I want to know from this inclusive perspective, particularly talking about the introverts, what do you think you offer or give? What are your strengths that you offer to your team on a daily basis?
I'm available. I say that's probably my number one strength. I am available by text. I am messaged by computer. My door is always open. So I think for me, that's one thing I do. I am always willing to listen, provide guidance. And I tell my team when I meet with them on a monthly basis, what's going well, You tell me, where can I help and what barriers do I need to break down for you? So part of it for me is being available, also being able to help them understand the greater context of what their work is doing. So sometimes they're reviewing small pieces, and I think it's good for them to understand, well, this is why this piece is important because it's going to lead to this greater strategic objective. So I think that's part of my strength, and then seeing the connections.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Availability is huge. It is an awful thing to need to talk to your supervisor or your manager and things are moving fast and you can't get them, can't get them. And you're concerned about, oh, if I make the wrong call, what happens, right? So I appreciate that. And also the ability to put into context what their work means for the broader picture, the broader view, the broader strategic vision, particularly when you know that you sit in meetings and rooms where that is being discussed, the future vision, and that's not something that they're necessarily going to be privy to. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I want to also talk about in your role, the ability to be transparent and authentic. So we've kind of talked around this, but I want to talk about it from the vantage point of being who you are, an introverted Black woman from Indianapolis, Indiana, in this major healthcare institution, been running it for 20 plus years. How have you seen your ability when you first started to now, your ability to be transparent, to be authentic, to genuinely be who you are in your role and not just be that, but be comfortable being that? Because for so many of us, that in itself takes a career. It takes a career to get from, even no matter what role and title and promotions and advancement, but just getting comfortable in our own skin. And for me, I think a lot of that comes from, to your point, where you start from. It sounds like you had such a phenomenal and strong foundation that maybe that was never an issue for you. For me, it has not been as much of an issue because I had a family who just kind of ingrained it in me that you belong and you're smart and you're talented and we expect great things from you. So I never question that. But I also appreciate how challenging that may be if that's not the foundation that you start from. So tell me about your walk with transparency and authenticity over the course of your career.
For me, authenticity is living my values. And so I was raised to live values. So I can't be anything else but that. I may not always be vocal or transparent about those values because I don't believe even my work colleagues need to know everything about me.
Right.
I need to be authentic in the professional way as to what's important. But I think for me, authenticity is clearly about values. And I live and show my values all the time. So that does not change at all. I think transparency, though, takes you time to be comfortable with failures and being comfortable with needing to have help. And so, I mean, that takes time. I was fortunate to have mentors and throughout my career who I could go to. But when you're in the seat by yourself, I'm like, okay, who can I ask this question to? I don't have a clue. So that took me a little bit longer. It probably took me several years, even at community, being transparent by feeling like I was asking the dumb question. Okay, guys, you all said 3 sentences that had 50 acronyms. I have no clue what we're talking about.
Right.
And so I've over the course of, the years have become comfortable being transparent where I don't know something and I need your expertise, your guidance, your support, or your direction going to get that. But that does take time.
Yeah. I want to know, Karen Ann, you just mentioned transparency means, or authenticity means, getting comfortable with failure. That's powerful. And I say that's powerful because I know, and I know it to be a real thing, that so many people, particularly diverse people, and particularly the higher up you go in the organization where there's so much visibility and pressure and public involvement, it becomes very hard to fail in a way that is tolerated by a company or a board, by executive team, etc. And many people, the truth of the matter is many diverse people don't get too many opportunities to fail. You fail one big time and that may be career ending most often. So how did you get comfortable? Because that's a lot of pressure. And I think a lot of people, even lawyers and diverse lawyers, avoid the GC role because it is that kind of pressure. It is high visibility, it's high pressure, and your failures are often public. and carrying that weight. How did you get comfortable with carrying that weight and get comfortable with failing in a really high visible way? Because that is not something everybody gets comfortable with or people ever get to a point where they can handle that kind of pressure.
So I will agree with you. I'm going to go back to something you said, is that I do agree that oftentimes diverse attorneys, regardless of in-house, in a law firm, any place, don't get as many opportunities to fail as some of their peers may. So I've seen that throughout my career. For me, though, at the end of the day is I don't take a lot personal. So our board would ask me on occasion, what keeps you up at night? And honestly, I've got two daughters. I'm a single mom with two daughters grown now. It's if one of them were sick. And I'll sleep well after that. So I think you really have to be very mindful about what you can control and what you take on and what pressures you put on yourself. I have failed in some areas. I've accepted the mistakes, and I've been fortunate, to your point, not everybody has been, to now have more tools in my toolbox to use in the future. But I think when you fail at something, you got to learn what were the reasons. You've got to do the mitigation. You've got to do the strategies, and you've got to utilize those failures to put processes in place not to do them again. But I have been fortunate in some circumstances of making mistakes, making failures. I tell my team, I'm not looking for excellence. I'm looking for okay, and good's outstanding.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that because I do believe. So you said a lot when you said, really accepting what you can control. I think a part of that comes with age and wisdom. I mean, it really does, because I am A-type, A++, but even as I'm getting older, I'm celebrating a birthday next year over year, you get a little more comfortable with, you know what, I can't control that, and I'm not going to let that, I'm not going to sweat it. That does come with age and wisdom for sure. But I do think there is wisdom in just that, knowing that there's no sense in me going crazy about something that is not in my control. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And, that's where I'm learning more and more, and day over day, where faith comes into play, that my mom has told me for years, whatever God has for you is for you, and can't nobody stop that. And I've seen it enough in my own life and career that you begin to just know that to be true, that I'm not going to worry about if that job's for me or that promotion's for me or this issue or incident is going to fall in my lap. That's just what it's going to be. And I'm not going to let it control me as compared to you having control over it. And I really appreciate that piece.
But you've got to learn from them.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of times people try to hide failures, hide mistakes, and don't take it the value of learning, what did it tell me? And maybe being in healthcare, it's different because, some would say medicine's an art, not a science. There's going to be mistakes in our major processes. What led to it? What systems caused it? What can I do to prevent it? And if you don't spend time on, unless it was something intentionally you did that was wrong, there's got to be some lesson in it.
Yeah, and obviously in the healthcare industry, there is no industry where mistakes cost significantly more than in healthcare. So light failures cannot be taken lightly, because in the next instance, that could be someone's life that ends because a mistake or something that should have happened didn't happen. As we begin to wrap up, I want to know, you talked about having sponsors in the beginning of our conversation, that you've had really good sponsors. I want to know about how you approach mentorship and sponsorship and championship for your own career and the career of others. You talked about making sure you promote your team, making sure you're not the biggest, loudest one in the room, such that you cover up your team, and they're being able to learn from them. What I've learned through this podcast and just being in business generally is typically the best leaders are the leaders that continue to promote and invest their team. So tell me how you approach mentorship and sponsorship. How has that, you've talked about a bit, how it's been important for your career, but how, particularly as I keep making you come to the end of your career, how do you view that now that you're really in a position to promote others in their career?
So for me, I mean, I think what often happens is folks don't take the time to accept mentorship or sponsorship. And I was one who followed directions, right, wrong,
Me
good, or
too.
bad.
Me too.
But
Yeah.
I saw some of my peers, oh, I'm a bright lawyer. I'm not going to do what they suggest. And so I think those who want to be mentored, those who want to be sponsored, really have to find those that they trust and take their guidance. If it means they say, hey, you need to go have lunch at this place once a week, you go and have lunch at that place once a week. Don't think that your legal skills are going to distinguish you, because if you're in the firm, you're equal with everybody else. There are other things that you've got to do. So I think what I learned early on is if I had mentors who helped guide me and I had sponsors who promoted me, I had to take those opportunities and trust that they were putting me where I needed to be. And so that's one thing. On what I try to do with my team is I try to have them lead the work with the business owners. And when business owners call me, which again, when you start off as a small department, everybody has your number.
Right.
and I'm still getting texts. Hey, Karen. I said, well, let me see who's assigned to that work and let me have them call you.
Right.
So I'm not going around it, but I think you have to be very intentional about when you allocate those work, get them in front and on the committees where those leaders are making the future decisions. And so we've gone through all the leading committees within the organization and placed legal team members on those committees. And then sometimes I'll have to remind them, hey, you're on the committee for a purpose, not just to listen. I need to hear your voice, even if it's a risk committee. You need to speak up, even if it's to ask a question.
Sure.
So that they know you're present, because a lot of these meetings are virtual now. So again, for me, it's getting them out there, making sure they're leading key works, making sure the C-suite folks know, hey, if I'm not here, you just knock on the door and they can help you out.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because particularly in the legal profession, mentorship and sponsorship, to your point, it's not just about the work itself. There's the community, there is all those pieces that are baked in, and that's critical. Okay, I'll say it again. As you begin to reflect on your career, I want to know what successes that you've had in your role that you're most proud of. Like, what are the things that you really think are going to be, part of your lasting impact and legacy, not just for the future of community, but also the the Indianapolis legal community? Because again, I think that you have been you've played such a staunch role in the legal community, having been in any in-house position for 20 plus years, having the ability to navigate the work, give out the work, hire attorneys. That, if you're in the legal game, that's where the power lies, right? And so what are you excited about as you look forward? But most importantly, for this particular question, what are you proud of that you've done to date in your career and the legacy you hope to leave?
I had to reflect on that. I'll come back to you in 6 months. I think one is I have an incredibly diverse team. I have a diverse team from gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, abilities, and whatnot. So I'm really proud of showing within the organization the diverseness of a team and the quality and competence of the work that they provide. So I'm really proud of that. I had the privilege of not only overseeing legal, I also oversee social accountability. And one of the things we've been able to do that I'm really proud of is to bring a lot of things that we do to help our neighbors with social drivers of health under one roof. And so we were able to bring in the food pantry. We do transportation services. We do food as medicine underneath this one rubric. And so being able to bring that together under one roof, I'm proud of. We brought a high-level ethicist into the organization. Again, I'm proud of having expanded the portfolio of what we offer to have a bioethicist to help us navigate ethical issues and challenges in a meaningful, appropriate way. So very proud of that as well. And then I oversee our corporate investigators, and I'm proud of the work they've done, that they've had the freedom to do, not just with things like drug diversions or whatnot, but trying to help and push forward with the second chance agreements. So people are impaired, they find them, and they help to set up a program that gives them a second chance at success.
That's
So
awesome.
I'm proud of some of those kind of things.
Well, those are pretty important, and I appreciate you mentioning them because I don't think that, everyone would know that communities doing like all that kind of outreach work and social community engagement and activity. That's really wonderful, and I'm sure it's very, very gratifying to see that kind of work done because particularly when you are an Indianapolis native and been in that community, this community, you see real things happening for the community, not just the C-suite execs or whatever, but you're seeing it all the way from the top floor to the ground floor. And I'm sure that's very, very, very gratifying. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all that you've given to this community and this environment, particularly in an environment where healthcare can be so challenging for so many people. The social determinants of health are a real thing that continue to be a way to divide folks, and being able to address some of those issues in a real way for people in our community that we know and see is very, very important. So as we come to the final question in the podcast, I just want to ask you particularly, and this is particularly important for you, being from this city, knowing the city the way you do from a business perspective, from a community perspective, from a familiar perspective, and from a historical perspective, given all the ways your family have been involved with not just being in the community, but seemingly developing Indianapolis and certainly the Black communities in Indianapolis the way that they have come today. What would you suggest for other Indiana leaders, corporate leaders, and particularly healthcare leaders to make sure that our healthcare work environments and leadership roles remain diverse, like you mentioned, that you've been able to build this diverse legal team and inclusive of all people in Indiana?
I think some are doing that work now, but I think it's really realizing that you hear oftentimes things should be merit-based. And what I've seen is they're often not merit-based because the person with the most merit might be diverse. And so I think as you begin to do that, people really need to say, what are the skills and talents I need? And I don't need to keep my little narrow group of people I call on. There is a broader group, and they need to begin to continue to promote who's in that broader group more publicly and not keep them kind of hidden away.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense to me. And Karen Ann, I'm just going to say again, thank you so much for all you've done for this community. Thank you for being our amazing guest on our little bit of historical time to celebrate 5 years of this podcast. It is leaders like you that this whole podcast was developed to highlight, give visibility, and allow Indianapolis to really appreciate so many of the gems and amazing leaders and legacy leaders we have right here. So thank you so much.
And the one thing I'll mention, though, and again, and I hope whoever needs to, is I think I've also served on 3 boards here. And so I'm the immediate past chair of Gleaners Food Bank Board.
Yes.
And I think when you're on those boards, you've got to continue to make sure you're addressing diverse issues. And so, are you looking at diverse issues on the board and what the staff is doing? I'm on the zoo board, and I'm now the chair of the GI committee. And so I think, again, those are ways of trying to, as leaders, there's always major leaders on those kinds of boards to begin to make those connections and to help provide other opportunities. And I'm on a symphony board on the governance committee. So again, I think as we have leaders serving on nonprofit or for-profit boards, they've got to continue to speak up in those roles to make sure they're getting other people, diverse candidates on those boards, because those relationships that you can make are very meaningful, impactful for future opportunities as well. So
absolutely. Absolutely. No. Board service is extremely important. And particularly in Indianapolis, board service and boards are really a lot of the ways that the professional community connects with one another, expands relationships. And I've seen it way too many times lead to business opportunities or job opportunities. So that's a real thing. Again, thank you so much for being here on the 60th episode, the 5th anniversary episode of the Freedom Forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to Karen Ann Lloyd, and thanks to you for joining us on this 60th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.